I'm really glad that we don't have to pick the winners right now because we're going to do our picks and all that, down the road. So we're just doing a background. I tell you, I have no idea who's going to win.
The good thing for the NL Central is if you're a team in that division, anybody can win it this year. The bad thing for that division is anybody can win it this year because I think there are some teams that you could argue as better as others, but I think it's just a very, very... If you want parity in baseball, look no further than the National League Central.
If I had to pick one team that I don't think has a chance to win the division, it would be probably the Pirates right now.
But even I think the thing with
even then,
these are all teams in transition, teams that are moving forward with rebuilds that they've been working on for a long time. A team in Milwaukee that I think is trying to find their new direction after they moved off of what was their current group. They're retooling.
True.
You have a Cardinal team that I feel like is kind of putting it together for one last hurrah, and then you've got a couple other teams in the Cubs and the Reds that are trying to say, hey, this is our season. But I think any of these teams really could lay a claim for, the division crown. So, if we're not talking about picks, I think you kind of have to go with the team that at least starting with the team that performed best last season.
Okay, I'm with you on that.
I think we should start with them just because I don't think they have a chance this season.
And that would be
the Milwaukee Brewers.
Yeah, I'm down on the Brewers. They have a new manager. The only reason they have a new manager is because their old manager is managing the Cubs.
He ran over. I wouldn't say ran over the Cubs. He got offered.
No, he got offered more money than any manager's got. $8 million a year.
And
wow.
I think they will miss Craig Counsell.
I think so too.
I
He's a
think
good
they
manager.
will miss him as much as Corbin Burns and Brandon Woodruff.
And Woodruff, is only not going to be a Brewer this year because he's hurt.
Right, but no Burns, no Woodruff. I mean, Freddie Peralta and Wade Miley are nice when they're your 3 and 4 starters. I don't think you feel nearly as good about them when you're their 1 and 2 starters.
And our Mets got Adrian Hauser, taking him out of the the Brewers organization.
The vaunted Adrian Hauser.
So yeah, I think it's true when you look at their rotation without those two guys. You're thinking, okay, well maybe Wade Miley is still there.
Well, right, but when he's your 2 instead of your 4, it's not as good.
And so that you don't have anything. They've been a pitching team, and you don't have that anymore. They still have Devin Williams in the bullpen,
right? And they've got Trevor McGill, who I believe there's no relation to Ty Lord.
I think
there might be.
Yeah, I think there is actually. He's his brother.
And they've got some guys, but it's not Devin Williams and Bill Hader or Josh Hader. Not Bill Hader. Bill Hader.
Right. That would be good if it was Bill Hader.
It would be great if it was Bill Hader.
Well, Josh Hader was gone, obviously, last year because he
left before that. But now you're not looking at the same sort of reinforced bullpen that you had, a couple of years ago where it was just guaranteed lockdown at the end of games with overwhelming stuff. And I think the other thing that if you look at this lineup, it's anytime you want to describe a lineup as it's a nice lineup, you kind of know what you're saying as soon as you start describing something that way.
Yeah, like when's the last time the Brewers lineup put fear into the opposition?
And it was a big problem for them last year. So they were a team that was very offensively challenged. And, I mean, Rhys Hoskins at first base will give you something, but is he really going to be the panacea here?
Well, I think, you're hoping that he can give you what I guess the last guy that I can think of there at first base was Rowdy Tellez.
Yeah.
Like that. So they don't really have a first base tradition. Didn't G-Man Choi try it over there a little bit?
Right, they tried him there.
So
I mean, you've got guys like, Willie Adames is a nice player at shortstop.
Talking about signing him to a long-term contract, too.
But I think when you look at this lineup, Yelich is definitely on the downturn of his career. He had sort of a bounce-back season last year. But I think if you're counting on Kristen Yelich to help power your team this year as the Milwaukee Brewers, it's not a good position to be
So
in.
the former MVP in Yelich, so his projections this year, and I think it's StatCast that's doing this, 19 homers, 22 stolen bases, he bets 260.
Yeah, but not with a 360 on base percentage out of your leadoff spot. Not anything you're loving.
So they got a good year out of William Contreras last year at catcher.
I think they kind of just got lucky. Was it the Cardinals that just sort of decided to bizarrely move on from him for no reason, really?
Yeah, and I think that he can hit, but I think defensively he turned out to be better than a lot of people
thought. Yes, and then I know that they like Garrett Mitchell. I know that they like Sal Frelick, but I don't know how much they're really counting on from them this season.
I assume they're counting on Jackson Churio a lot because they just gave him a giant contract.
Right. And obviously, I think in a year where this is a team challenging for the postseason, it's probably on the back of Jackson Churio making a gigantic leap as a player.
But I don't think they are challenging for the postseason. And like you said to start, the best chance they have is that all the other teams could blow up too, and they could end up, because they've been there a bunch of times, they could.
And I think that they've also been hurt by teams like the Mets going and raiding their bench for a bunch of their bench guys, because now outside of Gary Sanchez, I don't think most people have heard of anybody on this team.
And, expecting much out of Gary Sanchez. And that's kind of a weird combination to have at catcher, by the way. Gary Sanchez backing up William Contreras.
Very bizarre, because it's like, okay, well, we're not losing much on offense, but...
Yeah, I think William Contreras came from the Braves, actually, originally.
Right.
He came from
There's a lot of Contrerases floating around at catcher. It gets confusing.
But like most benches, like you said, there's a bunch of guys who you really like. Gary Sanchez is the only name you might remember. Joey Weimer, he's been around for a while, but I don't think he's far from a household name. Jake Bowers, there are not. These are not guys that are and Owen Miller, who. I thought Owen Miller, he was on the Guardians, and then he came over here, and he had a great start to the season a couple of years ago. And boy, wouldn't if he has solved their second base problems if he could actually do what he did at the beginning of that season.
Not.
Instead, Bryce Terang is going to go out there and play second base for them.
Right, who's not projected to do much for them. So it feels like the Brewers are a team that's very much in transition. They had a team that they were trying to get to go together, but now that they've had David Stearns move on, you've had Craig Counsell move on. It makes sense to sort of rebuild and retool as a franchise than trying to make what you've got left work in some patchwork manner.
I'm just a little worried that they're not doing either right now. Right, I don't really feel like this is a rebuild.
I think that they can't go there yet. You've got a few too many guys that are still there, so you
owe it to these guys. You owe it to these guys a month or two.
Let them play.
Then you sell the farm.
Maybe one of these young players breaks out in a way you weren't expecting. You would owe it to them to at least give them a shot. And then if you get to June or July and you're nowhere close, then you sell the farm and you get rid of all the guys and you start the rebuild.
Okay, so we're both kind of in the same place with the Brewers. I don't think either one of them, if we had to pick today, would pick them as division champions. So let's leave it there.
No.
So they were the defending champions, and they were chased down mostly by the Cubs last year, I guess.
I would say so, right.
So, and the Cubs' big move in the offseason, aside from re-signing Cody Bellinger, I guess that's a big move.
That's a big move for them.
It took them a long time to get there, is bringing in Craig Counsell, who I assume they must have a quotient that says we're going to win this many more games with Craig Counsell as manager than we would have if David Ross was manager.
I think they just felt like it was time to move on from Ross more than anything else. I got the picture that as much as they loved him, they weren't.
I always get this, and that's not David Ross. David Ross manages the Reds, right? So I always get this up. There's who's managing the Reds?
I don't think it's David Ross.
I always screw this up.
Okay, because I think David Ross is not managing the Reds because he was a Cubs guy, and that was the whole
thing.
Okay,
then
David Ross was the manager.
Okay.
Yeah, and then who's the Reds manager? David Bell.
Yeah. So two guys with four-letter last names always messes me up.
Right. So David Bell is the manager of the Reds. Right. David Ross was the manager of the Cubs, which now Craig Counsell.
He really didn't do anything wrong except that he's not Craig Counsell.
I got the impression that the Cubs were never particularly enamored with him as their manager. Like the Cubs, I mean, they were never in love with him. As much as they loved the player, I felt like for a guy that was as beloved a guy going in there, it didn't feel like you had that same love surrounding his managerial tenure there.
And I'd say the Cubs are the odds-on favorite at the moment, right, to win the division.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at their everyday lineup, look, they've got a lot of guys in there. I mean, they got a great year from Dansby Swanson last year. And Nico Horner actually turned out to be a player that you need to watch.
Nico Horner is a good player for them. And, Seiya Suzuki had a good year once he kind of put it all together. I think the thing that you look at with this Cubs team is that it's not a lineup of world beaters, but certainly in this division, I think it's the most solid top to bottom lineup that anybody's putting out there. And they do have the sort of unique thing where they're not in danger that one injury is going to sink them as a lineup.
They do have more interchangeable parts,
right.
I'd say.
Whereas I look at a team just because they're the easiest to commit to, like the Mets. if Pete Alonso or Francisco Lindor get hurt and miss significant time this year, shut it down. The Mets don't have a chance. Whereas I could see if Cody Bellinger missed time for the Cubs, it would stink for them, but it would not be nearly as impactful given what their overall lineup is expected to produce.
Where do you think Bellinger will play for the Cubs? And I say this because the depth chart has him as an outfielder here, having Michael Busch, who came over from the Dodgers, as the first baseman, if you're going to say that's going to get most of the time.
I think they will play him in the outfield as much as they can get away with it.
And that's only get away with it because he's good defensively. So I think he's
get
the
away
stronger
with it because
defense.
they want to keep him going.
Oh, okay.
Right, and you're always worried about it running him down. But I think they'll play him in the outfield because I don't think I think Busch at first base is better than who'd ever be in the outfield.
I think I was looking at Christopher Morel, who had an interesting season as an offensive player. He looks like he's got a lot of potential. He's got some pop. Mm-hmm. He played center fielder. He's a below average outfielder so far. Now he's young, and sometimes D-WAR stats don't necessarily tell you the whole story about a player. Mm-hmm. But I think that they're a little concerned about that, and I would think the Cubs would rather have Bellinger play more first base if they could get, as you say, more out of Morel in the outfield.
I think what they're hoping on is that they can move Ian Happ over into right field.
Yep, that's what they want.
Pete Crow Armstrong plays every day in center.
That is a guy they want to have play this year, and he's going to play.
He's going to play. There's a very good chance he wins a starting job out of the spring training. Defensively, it makes a lot of sense for them, but the problem is when you've got Seiya Suzuki, Ian Happ, and Cody Bellinger in your outfield, it's very difficult to take one of those guys out and not see a drop-off if you're putting somebody else
That's why Michael Busch is, to me, the odd man out, and Bellinger plays first base.
Now, I do think it is interesting that the Cubs seem to be trying to really hard to solve this first base problem because not only do they have Michael Busch and Cody Bellinger, they also have Patrick Wisdom, Dominic Smith, and Garrett Cooper on their bench. They've got a zillion first basemen that are all decent hitters, which I just think is odd.
And Patrick Wisdom has had a number of chances and has shown a lot of power.
I think he's bounced back and forth between here and the NBP.
Yeah. No.
That's another Cubs
He's played Major League Baseball the whole time, but came out as a big power hitter, still looking for his position on the field, I think, to a degree.
And I think the problem is, he's going to hit 19 homers he's projected to, but he's also projected to bat 211.
And it's funny that you mentioned who was it? Wisdom and you didn't mention Mike Tauchman, I should say, who's another guy, and Dom Smith.
I didn't mention Smith. I didn't mention Tauchman, but he's a center fielder.
Right. But that Smith is gonna actually get enough at bats to even be relevant.
Well, if he makes the team, that's the thing. Like some of these bench guys, I'm not sure how much Dom Smith makes this team.
So I think their bench is actually one of the stronger benches in the division.
I think that there's a bunch of guys on here that I could see playing in the major leagues for other teams, which is something that not a lot of teams can boast. And I think the other thing that the Cubs can boast is they actually have a pretty good lineup of starting pitchers.
That really would depend on so many things to me, right? Because I Justin Steele, I would say is your number one, and I'm comfortable with him there. But Jameson Taillon as your two, sliding into Shota Imanaga now as your number three. You're counting on a lot from these guys, and I don't know that you have enough. You don't have enough to go on,
right? But you don't have enough to compete with maybe say the Braves or the Dodgers.
Oh no, I'm not saying that.
But who else are you really trying to compete?
They got to beat the Reds, the Pirates, the Cardinals,
right? And I think they have a better staff
Brewers
than all those guys. Because Kyle Hendricks, as a 4 now, I'm fine with him as a 4. If he's my 4th or 5th starter, okay, I'm good with that. He's a savvy guy. He'll give you good starts, even if he doesn't have the best stuff anymore. It's when he was still their number 1 that I had an issue. But they got a breakout season from Justin Steele last year. Just becomes a question of whether or not he can repeat it again this season.
I just think that the pitching staff in general is good, as you say, not great, and you're counting on the lineup to be able to score.
I think you
runs.
certainly have to be concerned about their bullpen.
As you do every year.
Well, even with the additions of Hector Neris, it's just are you really in love with Adbert Alzolay as your closer? And you got a lot of. I've seen the Drew Smiley show before. It's not super fun.
Hector Neris moves over from the Astros.
Mark Leiter Jr. is still trying to figure it out, but he's really young, and they don't really have guys in this bullpen that you're like, I can rely on that guy to be a lockdown guy late in games, at least in the postseason.
Well, it's funny you say that because I was thinking about the Cubs championship in 2016, and they kind of had bullpen by committee that year,
And it just worked.
and were able to get through it. But when's the last time the Cubs have had like a dominant kind of closer you could count on?
That year was kind of Chapman for them, but that was not certainly dominant that you could.
Well, that's a good call. He's probably the most recent. It wasn't, and it was still pretty long ago. That was then. That was in 2016,
8 years ago.
So, and even he was the guy that was taken out of the game in Game 7. So,
Right.
I'm not sure how much confidence there is. So, I think but like we say about other teams, all the units on the team are
solid.
Yes, slightly above average or average.
Right. And so this is what gives them a good projection, going into next season. But I think it's interesting because the team that I'd say is probably most closely nipping on their heels isn't, I'd say, the St. Louis Cardinals, but is the Cincinnati Reds.
Yeah, they will be the chic pick this year, right?
Well,
Pick the Reds to win the division.
I'm getting annoyed with that. They've been the dark horse pick to win the Central for like years now.
Well, no, hold on a second. They started a season 3-23 just 2 years ago, so you're not a dark horse when you start the season 3-23.
People have been like, oh, well, are the Reds going to finally figure it out this season? The same way the Tigers have been getting mentioned like that in the Central for a bunch of years.
Those young pitchers.
But it's like, they got to put together at a certain point for me to give him any kind of credit. Like Hunter Green, yeah, sure, he throws really hard, but like the guy has to figure it out and have a good season at some point.
I actually, so individually, I love the Reds pitching staff because all of them seem to throw great talent out there. Even Graham Ashcroft. Forget about Frankie Montas for a second. I think that's a little bit of a nutty signing for the Reds because I think that's really taking a chance. I like Andrew Abbott. I over-like Nick Lodolo because he's looked good when I've watched him pitch against my team, and so that always makes you feel that way. They have guys with talent, and they have a lot of them, and for a team that, has some decent players in the lineup, I think their pitchers can hold them up.
Here's the problem. I like the idea of what all of the Red pitchers could be. I do not like what any of them are currently. That's that's the problem. There's no guy in me like, oh yeah, that guy.
So you're not counting on Nick Martinez coming over from the Padres as a starting pitcher now for the Reds and having 30 starts and thrown to a
it could
one.
happen. And I'm not saying that these are bad pitchers. Any one of these pitchers could have an unbelievable season. But I think the problem I have with them as a staff is there's no guy I can count on.
Right. Hunter Green's supposed to be that guy, but he's yet to prove that.
Right. And exactly. And I think whereas, at least with their lineup, unfortunately, I kind of feel like they're just a not quite as good version of the Cubs lineup. Like, you got a lot of different guys in there that can hit. They're just, pound for pound, probably not quite as good as the Cub lineup.
The one thing about a StatCast projection, when you look at what guys' stats are supposed to be, and if you look at the projected starting lineup, batting averages, for instance, and on base, they're all the same player. Everybody's 250. For
Everybody's
a
at
batting average.
250.
Everybody gets to like 330 on base percentage.
And they're going to hit between 15 and 20 home.
And they slug 400. It's like a team of the same player 9 times through the lineup almost.
Right. Now, with the lineup, that might work. I just kind of hoped, you'd have like one or two guys in there that'd be, way better than that.
Yeah, well, I know. I guess you're hoping that the Ellie De La Cruz that you'd like to be is going to be better than the one that actually statistically had a good season but not a great season last year.
Right. Now, he is an incredibly young player. So you hope that there's room to grow. Same with guys like Matt McClain and Spencer Steer.
Who had very good rookie years.
And they're very young. This is a young team. So I think that's probably what you would point to if you're a Cincinnati Red fan as the reason why it is their biggest strength and their biggest weakness is that they're a very young team. We don't know what to expect with them. They could play way above their heads this season. They could be this year's Orioles and just play unbelievable. They could also struggle, and play like 78-win baseball the entire season.
Yeah, I haven't decided, obviously, how I'm going to pick this year, but it's so tempting to say that they're going to put it all together, and you think, what am I saying?
Right.
What am I saying? And bullpen-wise, they've got Edwin's brother, who is... came on late last year.
Had a good year.
Had a very good year.
Then,
Emilio Pagan and Lucas Sims is a solid. So they've got.
The fact that you know who Lucas Sims is impressive.
Really? Oh yeah. Actually, I like that pitcher. Brent Suter also had a good year last year. So there are 4 or 5 guys in the bullpen that I know, and I'm not a Reds fan, that I know are good pitchers. So I think that bodes well for them. I think the danger is that they've got lots of young pitchers, and so they don't have that are starting, and so you don't really know how many innings these guys are going to pitch.
And so like we've talked about before, it's a very the first 2 months are very important because you cannot have a rotating door of short starts for these starting pitchers where you just tax this bullpen and they're dead. Like you might get off to a really good start that way and you're feeling great going into May, and then your bullpen just goes into the tank over the summer and you just lose a zillion games.
And I know we're talking about the bullpen, but when you look at the Reds' depth chart for starting pitchers, we talked about them already, but there are 7 guys. Right. So that tells you...
It tells you they don't know who's going to be starting.
Right, exactly.
Right. That's what it tells you.
So,
And their bench, they've got a couple guys on there. Obviously, Christian Encarnacion played a bunch last season. I think he's not projected to start or play as much, but given Jonathan India's proclivity of getting hurt, there's a good chance he'll get some at bats in there.
And Jake Fraley, also is a guy who contributes.
Luke Malley, I think they thought was their catcher of the future at one point.
And they're going to run Tyler Stevenson out there again this year at catcher to start, and I think that's a good idea only from the standpoint of having him handle this youngish pitching staff.
Having that kind of somewhat veteran presence in there should help.
And then
we'll get to the team that normally was on top of these discussions.
Weren't they picked to win last year? And I probably picked.
I don't think we. I hope we did.
I
hope we picked the Brewers.
I hope. But everybody always looks at the Cardinals and says, by hook or by crook, in some way, they're going to, come alive and win the division.
Well, I'm not going to say that.
Yeah, not this year.
We're also not picking teams, so it doesn't matter.
Right, exactly. And when you have a team that has Nolan Arenado and Paul Goldschmidt in your everyday lineup, you take notice, right? Because those are two Hall of Fame type players.
Yeah, but they're not Nolan Arenado and Paul Goldschmidt of 3-4 years ago.
No, and particularly, I think Arenado's closer.
We saw that we've already started to see the decline on both those guys. Goldschmidt does not hit for the average that he used to hit. He used to hit for 280, 300. Now he's like a 270 hitter, and that's if things are going well. They're still going to hit for power. Don't get me wrong. You're still going to get 25-plus home runs out of both of them, but they are not the same force in the middle of the lineup that they were even when they first joined the Cardinals.
And I don't really know why, particularly in Arenado's case, because he looked kind of uninspired some of the time, and then he kind of turned it on after the beginning of the season last year, and ended up having a good campaign. But his projected on base plus slugging is only 772.
No, he's never been. The thing is that you watch him and he's fallen down. Last year he was 774. He was 806 in 2021. He bounced back in 2022 because he had that fabulous season, but we're starting to see not quite the same player that we saw from 2015 through 2019.
And is that when he played in Colorado?
A little bit.
Well, and not that the ballpark where the Reds play is it still called Great America Ballpark? I don't even know anymore. But in any event,
I thought Great America Ballpark was the Reds.
You're right. It is. I'm saying
Busch
the wrong thing.
Stadium.
This is Busch Stadium. I'm thinking of the Reds for some reason. I think that is not the hitter's park. Obviously, that Colorado is, and no park is, but particularly for a power hitter.
Right, but what you're seeing, I think the thing that you have to be most frightened with Goldschmidt is Goldschmidt was pretty much, other than an aberration 2019 season where he hit 260, he's been a 290-plus hitter his entire career until last season where he hit 270.
So maybe he just had a bad year.
He was down 130 points. He was down to 447 in slugging.
A really bad year.
And the thing that's also scary is his strikeouts didn't really change.
Yeah.
He struck out about the same amount. He walked about the same amount.
So I'll say this about a guy that I think is
He's gonna be
a Hall of
36.
Fame player. I would bet more on a comeback than a continued decline.
I think that if they're going to be a bounce back year, I think you would get it this year. I think they're obviously counting on a lot from a guy like Jordan Walker, who had a good rookie year, but I don't think
being nice.
I don't think he had the year that they were hoping for, especially given that spring training.
Right. And Tommy Edman, I think, came up a little dinged up recently, so that there's concern there. Lars Nootbaar had a nice year last year. It was a good story, but he's not projected to be any kind of a great player this year.
If you're counting on Lars Nootbaar to be a huge driving force behind your team, you're asking a lot of him. He's a good player, a very good player. player. But even he, at nowhere in his point in his career has he even approached a Paul Goldschmidt, Nolan Arenado list. So then turn around and asking him to be the guy that carries them is asking a lot.
And so if you think about the Cardinal outfield from just a couple of years ago, I think it was Tyler O'Neill, Dylan Carlson, and Harrison Bader.
And all those guys are across.
They're gone.
They're gone.
They're gone. I mean, that was like one of the most
Well,
exciting.
Carlson's still there. He just doesn't play.
Right. You're right. Carlson's still there. And because Mason Wynn, I guess, is going to play shortstop for them this year.
He played shortstop for them last year.
And you know, I guess you got to have a guy play shortstop because there's nothing about his game that makes you go
thrilled.
He's gonna lead your team.
Yeah, Brendan Donovan is going to give you good at bats as your DH, but you kind of would like to get something a little more out of him.
And I thought he was your second baseman actually, but Gorman's going to play second base.
Right, because Gorman can hit.
Yeah, Gorman can. And I really liked Brandon Donovan because, again, when I've watched him play, he looks really good. Right. But then he plays against everybody else and he doesn't.
But I don't think it's the lineup that's going to be spelling the trouble for the St. Louis Cardinals this season.
No, I would say I'm going to agree with you on this 100%.
I think it goes a little bit more towards that.
Their pitching staff.
They have a staff?
Is experienced.
That's a very generous way to put it.
They have a lot of guys that have pitched a lot of Major League Baseball games.
This is true. Probably a few too many.
So Sonny Gray, he's pitched a lot of games. I think he came up a little dinged up recently. Miles Mikolas.
A walking injury waiting to happen.
He's
a good pitcher when he's available, but he's not often available.
Kyle Gibson, he's been around. Would be what you would say.
Right, which is what I would say if I wouldn't say that exact same thing about the guy that's following him on the depth chart and Lance Lynn, who has definitely been around.
And Steven Matz is still there.
Right, good for him for finding a home after he was cast off from the Mets
on the same
and
contract,
the Blue Jays.
Right? So, and he's just pitched well enough to not get fired.
That would kind of be how I would describe most of this Cardinals rotation. They're doing a good enough to keep getting a pitch in the major leagues, and that's kind of about it.
So, I'm not a giant fan of the manager, Ali Marmol, who I can't imagine.
I don't think Cardinal fans were super big fans of him.
And so when you look at the team and think, okay, so maybe they've got it together in the bullpen.
You're counting on a lot out of Ryan Helsley and Giovanni Gallegos.
Gallegos is just a guy who the tighter the game gets, the tighter he gets, and I don't know that that's a good thing for him.
But, Jojo Romero and Andre Palante gave them good seasons, and they're projected to have good seasons this year. But I think at the same time, there's just a lot of guys. The problem is I think even if the bullpen is good, I think they're just going to get too overworked by this starting pitching.
Yeah, and because those are all 5 and 6 inning pitchers at best.
Right. Andrew Kittredge, they're going to be asking a lot from guys like Andrew Kittredge and John King and Kenyon Middleton, not just from a performance standpoint, but just from a pure innings standpoint.
Now, the Cardinals will probably come out and start the season 16-6 and make me into a fool, but I think there's the possibility that they could be bad.
They weren't good last year.
Well, and so what everybody wants to say was the first losing season for the Cardinals in however many years, and so that this is just an aberration, and they're going to go back to their winning ways in a division, as we've said,
that's very weak. So there's a lot of reason to think that'll happen.
So I'm not really sure that they have a real chance. And then I guess we'll get to what I said before is probably the only team that I'm pretty sure doesn't have a real shot to win the division this year.
I think if you were going to sum up the Pittsburgh Pirates season, would you sum it up as Andrew McCutchen retirement tour this year?
Well, and that's, I guess, a fun thing for the Pirates fans, because as far as the team on the field,
they have some. I like some of their guys in their lineup. For me, it's their starting pitching that just I can't get excited about. Well, because if you look at their lineup, O'Neal Cruz is a fun young player. Brian Hayes is a good young player.
Brian Reynolds is a decent player.
Right. Even Jack Swayzewski
is good.
Gives you some pop out of center field, which you don't normally get.
But that's it.
Right. There's only so many nice things I can say about Rowdy Tellez and Yasmani Grandal.
And McCutchen, what do you expect from him at age, whatever it is, 38
Not a lot.
Or something like that? No, he's supposed to be the guy to keep it together in the clubhouse. I don't know. Liover Peguero is the second baseman. Joshua Palacios is going to play outfield for them. You still have too many guys on that team that you're not even sure what they were doing last year.
1 through 5, I feel pretty good about. 6 through 9, not so much.
So, okay, so then you turn it over to the pitching staff, and you said you have doubts
I
there.
like Mitch Keller. He was a
too.
good story. He's a nice young pitcher. But then once you get past him,
Yeah, the same pitcher, too. They have Martin Perez and Marco Gonzalez. And I have to say, I thought they were the same player for a long time because I think they're both left-handed.
They both kind of pitch
the same way.
They're both projected to basically be the same. And
They're like number 4 or 5 starters.
Right. If Marco Gonzalez was my 5 starter, I might be okay with it. When he's my 3 starter, I'm worried.
Luis Ortiz and Bailey Falter. I guess one of these guys could pop and just have a season you don't expect. But they're waiting for Paul Skeens, and they're probably not going to bring him up this year, is what I'm hearing.
Right, which makes sense because you're going to let this year go, see where you might be able to make some moves. Because I think the other thing that holds them back is David Bednar and Colin Holderman had solid years out of the bullpen. Bednar, I think, was their all-star. Holderman was very good in the first half.
Aroldis Chapman's there now, too.
Aroldis Chapman, but then you get past that, and you get a lot of guys. You have no idea who they are. That's never a good thing when you get to a bullpen.
It's going to be very tempting for them to bring up Skeens when they see that he popped 102 miles an hour on the radar gun in his first start in spring training, going, ooh, we don't have guys that throw 102.
Right. I think they will try and resist as long as
I don't. I think that the organization would probably be better served.
They would much prefer
if he didn't, because you're going to try to manage his innings through this year. So the relief corps is what you'd expect. The bench is what you'd expect.
When
for a team that's going to
Connor Joe is your leading bench guy.
Right. Henry Davis and Connor Joe.
Billy McKinney of Met and Dodger fame.
I remember Connor Joe and Jake Lamb, who this was a star player at one point for the Diamondbacks.
I think Star is putting it a little.
I think he had some very good seasons for the Diamondbacks, and I just didn't realize he was old enough to be at the bottom of the Pirates depth chart.
He had a season in 2016 and 2017 where he had 29 and 30 homers.
There you go.
He batted like 250.
Yeah, well, on the Pirates, you'd be a starter if you did.
Yeah, exactly.
If you did that, so yeah, I think they're gonna struggle. They don't have a lot of depth in the organization. They still seem to be not sure about where they are, although by drafting Skeens and doing that,
I think they're a team that is
bolstering their minor leagues.
I think they're getting ready to make a run for the division next season. I would be surprised to see them spend some money this offseason. You let this year sort of be the McCutchen farewell tour. You figure out which one of your young guys you can count on. I think you drop some money and you make a run at the division in 2025.
Yeah, do you think McCutchen gets his number retired in Pittsburgh?
I think so.
Yeah, me too.